Turtles. To say they've been around for a little while would be just a little bit of an understatement. They date all the way back to the age of the dinosaurs and are actually distant relatives. And turtles are what we're focusing on in this episode of Wild About Wildlife. What kind of turtles do we see here in Ontario? What role do they play? What threats do they face? How can you help? And we'll throw in a fun fact or two. I'm your host, Kathy Mueller, and I'm joined today by Scott Gillingwater from the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority. Welcome, Scott.
Hello, nice to be here.
So, in a nutshell, tell us about the role of the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority. What is it that you do? And probably just as important, what don't you do?
Okay, well, the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority has a number of roles, from water quality, water protection in terms of, flood protection for the City of London and some of the other urban centers. Also work with landowners for various ways to, conserve our local environment. However, my role as species at risk biologist is based mostly around our reptiles at risk in the watershed. And there was a gap, and there continues to be a gap, throughout Canada, throughout the world, really, in terms of interest and attention to reptiles. And they're kind of an afterthought when it comes to conservation and even just understanding the animals at all. So, with that being said, there was some funding available many years ago, and we were able to capitalize on that and build a program based around reptiles at risk.
And what is it about? Because you focus a lot on turtles as part of the reptile species. So, what is it about turtles that intrigues you?
Yeah, so we often we work with both snakes and turtles, but turtles were the taxa or the group of animals that we started with, and that we continue to work with. And I will say, one, they're one of the most at-risk vertebrates on the planet right now. They have a life history that makes it very difficult for them to adapt well to humans. Obviously, we create a lot of problems with our infrastructure, with our agriculture, with our roads, you name it, and turtles aren't able to easily adapt to those problems. And so with that came the need to study these animals to even know what was going on with populations. And it's opened our eyes to what, when we initially started with the spiny softshell turtle, an endangered turtle here in Ontario, we didn't know much about it. And over the years, as we learned more about the softshell turtle, we were able to do active conservation work with them. Instead of just getting to understand the animal, we focused on the ground work to help that animal. And from there, the program opened up to a variety of different species in the watershed, and even outside the watershed as well, with different partners.
I find it interesting that you say they have trouble adapting, given that they do date back to the age of the dinosaurs. So obviously, there's been some adaptation along the way for them to still even exist.
Exactly. I think the fact that they are creatures that have a shell or their own home on their back as protection worked very well, and only a handful of animals were able to find an answer to that shell in order to predate an adult animal. It wasn't until humans came along that, were very good at figuring things out. This group of primates arrives, and we know how to get that turtle into a precarious position in order to consume it. But I think further than that, we've also created vehicles that are able to destroy the shell of a turtle. So whether it's a car or a truck or even a boat, the shells don't stand up to most of the machinery that we've created. In addition to that, we drain their wetlands for some of the terrestrial species. We cut down the forest, and we don't give them a chance to live out their life to a point where they can reproduce and replace themselves in the population. So the problem with turtles, unfortunately, and it's part of their life history, which is basically their biology and ecology and how they survive, is that they take, most species, many, many years to reach reproductive maturity. And that causes problems when it may take depending on species, 5 to 20 years before they can lay their first clutch of eggs. But laying your first clutch of eggs does not mean that those eggs are going to hatch and those young are going to reach maturity. Some estimates suggest that turtles may have to live for decades after reaching maturity in order for one of those eggs to hatch and reach reproductive maturity itself. So herein lies the issue with humans on the landscape with an animal that takes many, many years to reach reproductive maturity. So you need to safeguard those adult animals, and that's what is not happening now. So from the time of the dinosaurs forward, that shell protected them from most predators, and some of these turtles were living 80, 90, 100 years, depending on species. And in the case of some of our giant tortoises, in excess of potentially 200 years. They needed that in order to replace themselves in the population. If we have a snapping turtle now that may take 15, 18 years to reach maturity, and it dies at year 21, that genetic potential is gone. And not all turtles take as long to reach maturity. Painted turtles may take 7 years, but when you look at it, in terms of how much we've done to the environment in a negative way, even 7 years is a long time to reach maturity. If you compare that with, say, an eastern cottontail who may be breeding within a few months, 9-month-old eastern cottontail is able to reproduce already. And that's why they do better in terms of expanding their population quickly if they've had a setback. Where turtles, if they get a setback, it could take many, many decades to replace themselves in the population. And in some cases, they may not be able to replace areas that have been too heavily impacted by humans.
I did want to touch on what's threatening turtles, and it sounds like humans might be the biggest threat.
Yeah, so I think, humans, there's just so many of us, for one, and the needs of humans for our food, for our housing, for our transportation, all impact turtles in a negative way. So when you look at the highest threats on the list, generally habitat loss and road mortality top the list for most of our turtles. The spiny softshell turtle may be slightly different. They have a somewhat different set of threats because they don't leave the water very often, and they're mostly in our rivers and in our lakes. So although they may have habitat loss of their nesting sites, the river is still there. There's still some opportunities. So softshell turtles may have to deal with illegal collection, with getting caught on hooks while people are angling, pollution in the water, invasive species that overtake their nearshore nesting sites. But in general, that's still human related. The pollution, the impacts of invasive species in their habitats, they were brought here by humans, and some of those invasive species that were brought here include, purple loosestrife, which was really a hot topic in the 80s and early 90s. Though it's kind of simmered down a little bit, but now we have issues of Phragmites australis, which is European reed, which is overtaking all of our littoral zone or shallow water habitats in Ontario, and those are some of the most important for turtles. And we also have issues along the Thames River, specifically with Japanese hops or wild hops, which is a vine that completely overtakes the nest sites of the spiny softshell turtle. So if you look down that list, it all kind of relates back to humans. And we're also seeing some additional issues. And I briefly mentioned illegal collection, and that in some regards is quite severe for some of our rarest species. Our spotted turtles, our wood turtles are if you think of it globally, are two of the most at-risk species for legal collection. The black market in turtles is massive, and areas such as Madagascar and Southeast Asia and some parts of the US are so heavily impacted by collecting that populations are declining simply from that alone. However, if you tie in then road mortality and habitat loss, pollution, and now the presence of diseases that are moved between wetlands by people and by how we do what we do causes further problems. Ranavirus and herpes virus, two types of pathogens that can impact turtle populations. So I always say when I do my talks that we have a list of, say 30 things that can impact turtles. If we cut that list in half, we could still lose our turtles. If we cut that list to just two items and say we got rid of every threat to turtles except for road mortality and habitat loss, we could still lose many of our populations. So it's a concerted effort in terms of how we deal with this, and it's a multi-tiered approach to attacking all the things that threaten these animals, from illegal collection to road mortality, habitat loss, and so on and so forth.
Oh, so I have so many questions based on what you've just talked about. The one thing that I want to follow up on is the idea of the illegal collection. So are turtles being illegally collected here in Ontario and being exported to other countries where there's a thriving market?
Yeah, so the information is limited, but the information that we do have all points in that direction. So there are people that will just randomly take a turtle home and keep it as a pet, and those are kind of the one-offs. And that's not good either. We don't want these animals collected and put in a tank, and that's also not permitted in Ontario for any of our Ontario species. However, it's the more organized collection events that cause some of the biggest issues. And if we look just, across the border to the United States, we can see that massive amounts of diamondback terrapins or eastern box turtles or spotted turtles or wood turtles have been illegally collected and moved between states and then illegally sold as captive bred animals, even though they were collected from the wild. But if they get smuggled across state lines where there are no protections for them, the sale is then legal of an illegal animal. If the authorities knew it was a legal animal, that'd be different. But there's so many loopholes that people get away with. So when we jump back over to our side of the border, we do see, and working with conservation officers, we know that there is collection going on. We know that people have been caught at the border with some of our native animals. And so it's an issue that has a few different origins, I guess you could say. So there is collection for the food and medicine trade. So depending on an individual's, cultural or national beliefs that these animals could cure cancer or could make you healthy, some animals are chosen because people think that they provide a health benefit if they're eaten or parts of them are eaten. In some cases, it's just the lower shell ground up into a powder. There's no real scientific basis for this, but beliefs are beliefs, and people will still go out and do that. There's collection for the food trade, which some people love their turtle soup, and their parents collected snapping turtles, so they're going to collect snapping turtles, so on and so forth. And all of that now is not permitted in Ontario. However, it still happens, and it happens enough that there are pretty serious, consequences for to the populations when this happens. There was a recent issue in the Dorchester area where large numbers of hooks were put out to catch snapping turtles. Some snapping turtles were found dead, some still alive, and there's an ongoing investigation. So this kind of stuff is happening, and it's generally the people that get caught are the ones that we're not cautious enough. So there's a lot going on that we don't know about, and that lends itself to further declines. And then when we look at the third origin of collection, and that's for the illegal pet trade. Some people want something that is interesting. Turtles are pretty interesting. Something that's rare. Many of our turtles are very rare. Or something that's very beautiful. Some of our turtles are absolutely gorgeous, such as the spotted turtle, the wood turtle, and even our native painted turtle, which is one of our most common species. It's a beautiful animal, and it may not be part of the trade that gets smuggled across the border like our wood turtles and spotted turtles might, but so many painted turtles are captured and kept in captivity because they're a beautiful animal. So those three different ways in which these animals are collected for, again, can impact these animals on a large scale in some circumstances.
So why do we need turtles? What role do they play in our environment?
I get asked this question a lot, and first, I'd like to say that we should protect wildlife and animals and turtles for the sake of protecting wildlife and our turtles. They don't need to offer us anything or our environment anything to be worthy of that protection. But with that being said, turtles play a significant role in our ecosystem and in our environment. They are predator and prey, so their eggs and their young are eaten by a large assortment of wildlife species. And a lot of times, raccoons get painted with a pretty negative paintbrush, I guess you could say, because they do take large numbers of turtle eggs. And part of the reason that maybe more turtle eggs are taken now than previously by raccoons is because raccoons in especially urban areas or around parks or agricultural areas are in higher numbers than they were, historically. So we call them subsidized predators, and we can see that with some of our skunks, our raccoons, our coyotes, etc. And they will take more eggs than they maybe naturally would have because their populations have ballooned because of excess food and garbage from humans. So there's an issue there. But in terms of how we understand the life cycle for these animals and their predators, we don't want to demonize any of the predators, but we want to understand why there might be more of an impact on some of our turtles.
With all of these threats to turtles out there, what kind of projects are you and your team working on to try and make sure that they continue to exist?
First, I'll say we walk a fine line between promoting what we do and not giving away exact location information. And in our world today, you have to give a certain amount of information or people aren't going to know. And if people don't know, they don't care. If they don't care, they're not going to try and assist. So we start by providing education. So we have a public awareness program where we provide information through our Instagram accounts, our Facebook accounts. We go to large events. We bring in people to our lab to get people in to appreciate these animals. When it comes to our field work, we are actively going out to assess habitats, to assess populations. We measure, weigh, and mark most of the animals that we find, whether it's turtles or snakes, and this provides, a lifetime opportunity to follow these animals. For our hard-shelled turtles, we'll file a notch into the back of the shell or a series of notches, and each notch is identifiable for each turtle. For soft-shelled turtles, because they don't have a hard shell, we use microchips or pit tags, just like you'd use for a dog or a cat. And again, that provides us a lifetime of opportunities to study that animal. In some cases, we also do radio telemetry, where we put a radio tag on the back of the shell of the turtle, and through our receiver, we can follow that animal to see where it's gone. So the difference between the radio telemetry and the pit tag is that the pit tag is passive. We need to recapture that animal to scan it to know who it is, where the radio tag we can follow with our antenna and see what it's doing, where it's hanging out at different times a year. So it leads us to the turtle. However, that is expensive. It can cause a bit of stress on the animal. And the tags only last, depending on the battery life, from a few months to a couple years. So those studies, we try and limit it to only times when we really need to know something to benefit the species, because we don't want to do something just because we're curious or to increase our role in our career or something like that. We want it to really benefit the animals. And in addition to all of this, we also rehabilitate and create habitat. So we are looking at opportunities to create basking areas for the turtles to come out into the sun. We want to create nesting areas, or technically oviposition sites, they call them. And that's where the turtle comes up to lay eggs. We want it to be appropriate for each turtle. Each species is a little bit different in their preferences. So we create different types of habitat for different turtles. And in general, we try to ensure that we can protect larger sections of land. So whether that means working with landowners to set aside a piece of property or looking at options to buy up properties that are very important for these animals. So we do quite a bit of work to conserve the animal, to educate the public, and all of this is tied into information that we then provide to the government, that we provide to our scientific peers. So we're not reinventing the wheel each time, so we can learn from one another and build on that information to have some real impacts on these animals. We're not doing it because we want to be known for it. We want to do it because we want these species to have long-term survival in Canada, which is getting tougher and tougher worldwide for turtles.
I'm speaking with Scott Gillingwater from the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority. And Scott, how would you respond to someone who would question the projects that you're working on and say, it's really just interfering with nature. Let nature take its course. Some species will die out, new species will be identified. We don't have dinosaurs anymore. So how would you respond to that sort of a question?
Yeah, this is something that, is even talked about in scientific circles. We have, this much funding and this much to do. So where do we put the most effort? So obviously we can see that the work we've done has been successful. We can see population starting to increase. So we know what we're doing is the right route. So we don't want to abandon that. If it was a sinking ship, we had very little funding and what we were doing wasn't working, we would really have to rethink, what's going on. In terms of just letting things slide, that's a domino effect. When you let one species go, there's another one not too far behind that will also be impacted by that loss. And if you see this chain of events start to occur, you see the ecosystem become weaker. There's so many animals that depend on other animals to survive, and if we take away, part of that link or part of that puzzle, we will see in time some of these systems begin to fail. And when these systems fail in the long term, it eventually leads back to us. It will impact us. If we're affecting air quality, water quality, climate change, causing extreme storm events, extreme drought, all of this does impact us. And we can look at these animals as an indicator species, the canary in the coal mine of what's going to happen. But beyond that, I think it's humans that have caused this problem, and now it's humans that need to resolve this problem. So, this is something that, I grew up in the country, and I saw wetlands drained, I saw forests cut down, and it instilled in me a sense of a need to protect these species, these spaces, because it meant so much to me. And I know, you know, I don't always like to talk about animals and how they mean to humans, but in this sense, if it makes someone care, man, these animals mean a lot to our children, to us when we were young, and hopefully still as adults, and they are so important to how we view care and concern for our surroundings, our neighborhoods, our communities, and our local environments. So that's kind of how I guess approach that topic. But I think above all, personally, we screwed it up. We need to fix it.
Yeah, I remember as a student in elementary school or high school going out on field trips out to the nearby marsh, and with the nets and looking at the different insects and everything that call that marsh home. And I think you're right there that if you can spark that interest at a young age, right, it bodes well potentially for the future. You mentioned over the course of our conversation the several turtle species. So, what turtles do we have in Ontario, and how are they doing? Are they at risk? Are they endangered, or are they doing okay?
Yeah, we have 8 native turtle species here in Ontario. And of those, all are listed at some degree of risk, either federally and or provincially. So there's two governing bodies that will legislate protection of our reptiles. So the federal level might be slightly different protections than we see at the provincial level. However, if we look at our 8 species, we have the spiny soft-shelled turtle. It's found in a handful of rivers and along Lake Erie and a little bit along Lake Huron. It is listed both endangered both federally and provincially. Our spotted turtle, a tiny little beautiful turtle species, endangered federally and provincially. Blanding's turtle is endangered federally but threatened provincially. Our northern map turtle is special concern both federally and provincially. Our Midland painted turtle is federally listed as special concern but not listed provincially. Snapping turtle is special concern, both provincially and federally. Our eastern musk turtle is listed as special concern, federally and provincially. And what have I missed? Have I missed anything here? I haven't been counting as I went, but we also have a species that has been listed as extirpated federally, which is the eastern box turtle, and not assessed or not listed under the provincial legislation. And the eastern box turtle is presumed to have been here at the beginning of European settlement, but with the large scale deforestation of southwestern Ontario, it was likely lost. It still occurs in Michigan and New York, our nearby states. So we've got a handful of species that are native and still here. One that is potentially been lost, the eastern box turtle. And we also have a number of non-native species that show up here and there, but one consistently shows up, and that's the red-eared slider. So people love red-eared sliders. They're a beautiful little turtle from south central United States. They are the old school dime store turtle, which is still found in pet stores, though the local pet group, Pidjac in Canada, has worked with biologists to try and limit the sales of red-eared sliders in Canada, because what's been found is that people will sometimes release their turtle. One, ethically, that's not good. Many turtles don't survive our winter. However, enough red-eared sliders are surviving our winters that we're seeing them show up in a lot of our natural wetlands in and around urban centers especially, but also in natural areas. And through work that I've done over the past 15, 16 years, we've confirmed that they are now nesting successfully here in Ontario. And we don't think too many young are hatching out. I'm not worried that we're going to be invaded by all these natural hatched red-eared sliders, but it is a non-native species that shouldn't be breeding here. And my biggest concern is diseases from animals that have been released. So of our 8 native turtles, one extirpated turtle, and one non-native turtle that survives our winter in the London area, Strathroy, London, and around Salthaven. I think the species that we see most often, if you're on the Thames River and you're lucky enough, you'll see the endangered spiny softshell turtle and the special concern northern map turtle. In a lot of our ponds and wetlands, you'll see the Midland painted turtle and the snapping turtle. So those four are the ones that we see most regularly in and around London, especially near the Thames River. But they're also in the Upper Thames River watershed, Blanding's turtle, spotted turtle as well.
If you do see a turtle, you talked about the snapping turtle, and I have seen one on, the Thames Valley Parkway, as I'm on my walk. Are you supposed to pick them up and help them along because they move a little slow? You can get them there a lot faster than they would go. Or what do you do? Do you do anything?
This gets a little tricky because there's a few things to think about. If it's on a small little trail and they're probably going on their way, we leave them be. If there's heavy bike traffic on a trail, on a paved trail, and it's a young turtle, we will often just at least get it across the trail, if not to the nearest body of water, as long as it's very close by. However, when you have these adult animals, especially if they're on roads, what I always say is protect yourself first. There's been a number of occurrences of people getting killed trying to help turtles across the road. So if there's no traffic, you are 100% sure that you're not going to be injured during this endeavor. I tell people it is good to help a turtle across the road. So a lot of people say, well, do you move it in the direction it was heading? In most cases, yes. If it looks like it's half decent on the other side of the road, yes. But some people follow that too literally, and we've had people move a snapping turtle across the road into a Walmart parking lot where there's a wetland on the other side. So use common sense. So if there is no good habitat where it's heading, put it back on the side of the road where there is habitat. If there is habitat on both sides of the road, put it in the direction it was going.
And is there anything that, like, I hear snapping turtle and I think, okay, I'm going to lose a finger. How do you do it safely other than, watching out for cars yourself?
So snapping turtles, yes, they do, provide a different scenario or a different situation you have to contend with. They're not mean, they're not aggressive, but they are defensive, and they will snap like there's no tomorrow to protect themselves. They don't have a lot of protection on their lower shell, so they will try and turn to face you. So what I tell people, if you feel confident enough and you have experience with animals in general, if you can grab it by the base of the tail to stabilize it initially, that way it can't turn to face you, then you can slide your other hand underneath the lower shell to protect it from dislocating vertebrae in the tail. Then you can safely move it across. But it's still going to try and scratch your arm, and it can snap out so strong that you'll feel that movement in your hands. So not a lot of people like to do that, and I completely understand. And don't do it if you think you might drop the animal, and hold it as close to the road as you can if you are confident in doing it. Other ways that people have done it is they've grabbed the back of the shell and just dragged it carefully backwards in order to get it off the road. Other people carry a snow shovel in their car,
Mhm.
or convince the turtle to climb onto a mat from their car, and other people allow it to bite a stick and drag it across. But I will say, if you're not sure don't risk yourself. They can give you a big bite. They're not going to be breaking bones or anything like that, but they will cause a serious bite. Sometimes just waiting out the turtle and protecting it as it crosses is another option, because they will constantly turn to face you, and not everyone's comfortable with reaching around and grabbing this small dinosaur by the tail.
Right, so act as a crossing guard for the turtle.
If you can safely, yeah.
And you talked a little bit about hibernation and is surviving the winter. So, do our turtles in Ontario hibernate? Is that how they're surviving the cold temperatures?
Hibernate isn't the perfect word for our turtles or our reptiles. The reptile version of hibernation is brumation, and it's a slowing down of their metabolism and their breathing and all of that stuff. However, they're still active under ice. They don't go into a sleep like a bear would, where as soon as they warm up, they are good to go. They might have some lactic acid buildup, but they are definitely, able to move and carry out their daily process. It's not a formal hibernation, but this brumation means that they need to slow down to not use their fat reserves during the winter. So again, they can move under the ice if conditions are not great in one spot. They can move to a spot that might be a little bit warmer or slightly better, for whatever reason that the turtle needs it to be. They can breathe through the dissolved oxygen in the water, so they can stay under the ice for months at a time. However, there's a lot of variation between turtles. So if you were to look at, say, a spiny softshell turtle, they are found in our Thames River, Sydenham River, Lake Erie, and a few of our other big bodies of water. And the reason that they're in those areas seems to be that they need those areas to survive the winter. If you look into where the softshell turtles occur, where it doesn't freeze up in the United States, they are in all kinds of different wetlands. However, they're limited to these big streams, big rivers, and big lakes. And we found that the high oxygen content in the water is needed for them to survive. Whereas if you have a Blanding's turtle or a snapping turtle or a painted turtle, you can sometimes find them in flooded ditches and small farm ponds and swamps that have very low dissolved oxygen. So we refer to that as anoxic or near anoxic conditions, and it's those low oxygen conditions that would kill a softshell turtle. However, our snapping turtles and Blanding's turtles, spotted turtles, painted turtles are incredible at surviving winters with very low dissolved oxygen in the water. Their requirements are so small that they can survive in these wetlands that you wouldn't understand how anything could survive. Thick ice, but there's still liquid water below, and they find a sweet spot where the ice and the snow actually acts as a buffer, and they will find the sweet spot of 2 to 4 degrees, usually around 4 degrees, that they do well during the winter. If they were to freeze solid, they wouldn't survive. With that being said, some of our turtles will have nests that are laid in this, spring or early summer. The turtles will hatch out of the eggs in the fall, but not emerge out of the ground. So they're really not in very deep areas, and they're still, above the frost line. So these turtles will overwinter in that nest chamber, and turtles such as our spotted turtle, map turtle, and painted turtle have a certain amount of freeze tolerance when they're at very young or hatchling size. So while most of our turtles brumate or hibernate in aquatic areas, some of these hatchling turtles will be in a terrestrial area within the frost line and still survive and hatch out the next spring. So there's some pretty unique and incredible ways that these animals survive winter.
What else can the average person do, especially as the weather starts warming up and more turtles could potentially be seen and spotted out on the roads or the trails and that? What can the average person do?
So there's a few things. So if we look at in terms of what can you do in the winter by your computer, you can advocate, you can share stories about turtles and research. If you have the means available to you, projects like mine are very much dependent on funding from the public. We do have some, federal monies that we get, but it doesn't cover all the work that we do. So you can, offer donations to programs that are working with these animals. You can, again, share information that is accurate about our native turtles and in their plight of survival and the people working with them. In terms of on the ground efforts, you can be part of Thames River cleanup or some of the local community cleanups to remove garbage from our natural areas. This is all beneficial. You can speak with your local MPs. You can speak with your local government about enacting stronger laws or enforcing laws that exist. You can also let people know your concerns by how you vote as well. That's also very important. Every 4 years, we have a chance to ensure that a government gets in that cares about our natural areas and our wildlife, so you can have a voice when you vote. We also look to citizen science. So sometimes we do have members of the public volunteer with our program and help out sometimes in our lab, where we hatch out up to 10,000 turtles a season of multiple species in our lab. So we collect the eggs, we incubate them in the lab, and then we release the young. And sometimes we allow community members to be part of that, but also we promote citizen science. So if you have a smartphone, most people have their smartphone these days, and you can get an app called iNaturalist. And even if you don't know what species you're seeing, iNaturalist will help you ID the species, and will provide a record of that animal that scientists can have access to. So for some of our threatened and endangered species, it won't give the exact location to most of the general public. Those scientists have an opportunity to get access to the exact locations of these rare species that we work with. So we see that as one of the most important, ways that citizens can work towards protection, or at least a better understanding of where these animals are. And then that gets back to people like me. And I also get calls every year of people having turtles nesting in inappropriate areas, and we will go out and protect those eggs that were found in someone middle of someone's laneway or at the edge of a busy road, and we're able to ensure that those nests survive. And it's through the community's support that we're able to have a greater reach, because we can't be everywhere all at once. So when we get that information, it really makes a huge difference. And I will say, back in the early days of us doing the spiny softshell turtle work back in the mid 1990s, we were tipped off by a community member of where softshell turtles were nesting, and that's become now our main study site, and it is also the largest known communal nesting site in Canada for the species. And
Wow.
that's all because a local individual said, "Hey, what's this? You might be interested." So very important. And I think just educating yourself and educating your kids goes a long way into understanding and having that conservation ethic kind of ingrained into us.
Yeah, I'm making a note about coming into the lab to be part of the hatching 10,000 little baby turtles. So it just sounds, yeah,
Yeah,
amazing.
it's an unbelievable experience, and it was the dream since I was a kid to be doing something like this. So I've always been this little turtle nut, this reptile nut, since I was a kid. I was the one saving them off the road, and I found out later rehabbing them illegally in my basement. But I was a 10-year-old, not knowing I was doing anything wrong. But it was always, I was always known as the turtle boy in my community, because I was just the kid that just couldn't understand why no one cared as much about these animals. And so all these years later, I'm able to still play with turtles, but do it in a very constructive way.
All right, let's wrap up with a couple of fun facts about turtles. And one that I was reading is that turtles actually don't have teeth, that babies are born with one tooth and then they lose that and then they have no Is that true?
Yeah, so there's this little item on the tip of the snout below the nostrils called the caruncle or egg tooth, and is a sharp deposit that allows them to carve through the egg in order to easily escape from the egg. And
Ah.
so this falls off in a week or two. And it's funny because the softshell turtle has a long snorkel like nose. So you'd wonder how this little egg tooth below the nostrils would have any effect. But when softshell turtles hatch, their nose is so long, it's in between their eyes and their forehead, and they still carve through with that little egg tooth or caruncle. So a pretty unique adaptation.
And then the other one is like we all know that when they're scared they go into their shell, right? They We can't see their limbs and their head and that. But they can they wriggle out of their shell?
They can't. So unlike hermit crabs that will climb out of a shell and find a new one as they grow, it's the shell of the turtle grows with them. Just like we can't detach ourselves from our spinal cord, the shell is the spinal cord of the turtle. And if you look under the lip of the shell, the skin is fused to the edge of the shell. And if that ends up getting torn, it's an injury, just like if we get a cut on our hand and has to be healed. So they are stuck within their shells, and they grow with them.
Okay. And just if anybody is listening and they come across an injured turtle, then to give Salthaven a call, and Salthaven would be in touch with you, Scott, as a good friend of the clinic. And for more information, for more resources, I know you're also part of an organization called SOAR.
Exactly. So, under the umbrella of Upper Thames River Conservation Authority, our program is Southern Ontario At Risk Reptiles, also known as SOAR. And we'll provide information to you to provide to listeners on how to get in touch with us through our Instagram account, through our Facebook account, and also provide other options to also see what else we do at the Conservation Authority.
Perfect. Well, we'll end it on that note. Thanks so much for joining me today, Scott. We just really scratched the surface of turtles, so we'll have you come back for another episode.
My pleasure. Happy to be here. And thanks for talking turtles.
And thank you for tuning in. If you have any questions about turtles that we didn't answer today, you can always email me at wildaboutwildlife@salthaven.org, and I'll follow up with Scott and we'll make sure that you get the answer. Together, we can all keep the wild in wildlife.